Welcome to the Coach's Table podcast, where coaches come to grow personally and professionally through real-world application and online education. What is going on, everybody? Wow, happy Friday. It is gorgeous here where I'm at in New York. For some of you, I don't know where you're at. It might be cold, but for me, it is absolutely gorgeous. T-shirt, short weather for sure. Today's guest, I think you guys are going to be absolutely amazed by the amount of information, education, and knowledge that she's going to bring you. But before we introduce her and before we get going into this, guys, as a reminder, if you like this episode, do me a huge favor. Like, comment, subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a huge favor as well. Drop a comment below on YouTube and, let us know how much you like the episode, how much you appreciate it as well. And we're super excited for it. So without further ado, a researcher, PhD student, online coach, powerlifter herself, a wealth of knowledge, Alyssa Parten. How are you today?
I'm doing really great. I'm excited to be here and excited to talk to you about everything we have planned for today.
Yeah, me too. We were just talking, beforehand, and I think we spent almost 20 minutes just talking beforehand in regards of like all the different things that, in the intricacies of different fields and different training modalities and everything else as well. So for those of you that don't know her, she's a research student right now at North Alabama, getting her PhD. And it's actually really fascinating what she's getting her PhD in. So would you tell us like what you are researching?
Yeah. So, I came into my PhD very interested in powerlifting. Shocker. Because I have been powerlifting coaching for a number of years now. And so that's really all that I knew coming into this. Had no idea what my research area would be when I started my PhD. But through the, your brain working and meshing with my mentor and other students, I've kind of pieced together my research area over the last couple years that I have been here. I'm toward the end of my second year, which means I will start my dissertation after this semester. So I have to propose my dissertation at the end of this semester. And my research area is twofold. One of the areas that I look into and what I started researching whenever I was a first-year PhD student is training modalities that improve markers of performance, specifically strength and power output in trained females. So obviously, most of the literature to date I think everybody knows this, has looked at males. They are a little easier to control for. And so I'm more so interested in what improves female performance. Obviously, I work with a lot of female competitive powerlifters. And even if they're not competitive, I work with a lot of female recreational powerlifters that are still invested in improving their maximal strength. So I took my cohort of 20 trained females, including myself. I was an outlier though. And I put us through a 7-week resistance training program that compared accommodating resistance, which you're probably very familiar with working with strength and conditioning athletes, and traditional resistance, so without elastic band accommodating resistance, which is what we used. And we tested their 1 rep max strength and their squat and bench press before and after. We also looked at their bench press endurance and their Wingate power output. And so that was the first study that I conducted. And along with that, we also looked at post-activation potentiation in these trained females afterwards and comparing traditional versus accommodating resistance in the back squat. So I would say that's one of my areas, looking at training strategies and what is most effective for females. Hopefully that can carry over to female athletes. We looked at obviously recreationally active females because not all of them were involved in a sport. Some of us were, just not the entire cohort. But that was one of it. And then my dissertation area will actually look at resistance training's effects on female metabolism. And so we are looking at how a bout of resistance training is going to affect their carbs versus fat metabolism afterwards. So the reason for that is because as you age, your fat metabolism is impaired if you are not physically active. So that's like the caveat there, that while women are going through like the perimenopausal phase, so they're transitioning from premenopause, reproductive years into menopause. A lot of the times we see a higher increase of risk in different metabolic disorders, and that would include like obesity, type 2 diabetes, an increase in weight. And so that is often associated with not as good of an ability to oxidize fats at rest. Mm-hmm. So that's where I came in and was like, I wonder if resistance training would improve fat oxidation at rest. Because right now we more so associate aerobic exercise with improving those different markers. And if you look at any guidelines and textbooks, it's like, to prevent metabolic diseases, endurance, aerobic exercise. And so I wanted to see what would happen if we looked at, this instead, resistance training, because that's my area. So we're doing that for my dissertation. We're going to compare upper versus lower body resistance training on fat oxidation rates, more so specifically fat oxidation, but we will look at total substrate oxidation based on that's the data we get from the equipment we have. And then we're also going to compare menstrual cycle phases, so follicular versus luteal, in these premenopausal eumenorrheic / normal menstrual cycle women. Mm-hmm. And so we'll do that. And then we're also going to look at, there's one extra study we're going to do, and it's more so on how long females need to fast before they go through a trial like this. And that's more of a protocol study for just future researchers. We, again, like I said, most research to date has been done in males. And currently the protocol we use on fasting before these types of tests were done in males, but there are certain differences specifically in like how quickly we digest and absorb nutrients from our previous meal. There's differences between males and females, even between females who take oral contraceptives and those who don't. So we're going to figure out essentially what's the right protocol for that. So that will be my dissertation. So that would technically be my area of research. But as I've learned through my mentor and pretty much anybody with PhD after their name, you continue to grow. You continue to find interest or have research questions as you do different studies. And so, my mentor studied something like totally different for his dissertation than what he's doing now. And then he's got me and a couple other of doc students who have vastly different areas that he has to, tap into. Yeah. So while that's my study area now, you just never know what will happen in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just like, that's just life in general though, right? Like you say, I'm super interested in X. And then as you start going, whatever the case may be, like, I'm going to go this way and this way and this way and this way. And then next thing you know, it's like, I'm, totally off path to where
apart from where you started.
Yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't say off path. It's just, things just go a different direction. And that's okay. So for those of you that listen to her just now, and if you didn't gather everything she said, let me kind of summarize it really fast for you. She's looking at stuff that's extremely complex because she's extremely intelligent, and specifically for the female athletes. Because if you look at any sort of research, or if you know research at all, it's two kind of major pitfalls that we see is like it's in males typically, and it's typically in untrained males, right? And so it's really funny because then they're like, oh, well, like they see all these adaptations. It's like, well, yeah, they should because they're untrained. Like you throw anybody into anything that's untrained and then just get them doing something and they're going to see an adaptation. Like that's just common sense. Like, you take a 17-year-old kid that's never trained before and then it's like, oh, you put on 20 pounds of muscle. It's like, well, yeah, it's because he can't stress his body. I mean, like it's not rocket science, right? So I think that's been such a major downfall in research. As we read it and we're looking at the population, the inclusion criteria, the exclusion criteria, all this other stuff. And it's just like, if we're talking about the population of athletes, if we're talking about the population of resistance trained female athletes, that's a very specific population. And a lot of research just doesn't have that, let alone male trained athletes, right? Like it's just all untrained males. Or recreational or, whatever. And it's just like, well, of course they're going to see an adaptation. And a lot of times research still fails to provide anything, even in these untrained male populations, right? Like it's interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because it's like then you have to get into the real nuance of it. Okay, but what's trained to you versus like for me, like to me, a trained like powerlifting athlete, they've got a couple years under their belt. They got a couple competitions under their belt. And that was kind of a downfall to my first study because we ended up choosing trained as was written in the ACSM guidelines. Sure. And we did include that they had to be barbell trained. They had to be doing the barbell back squat and bench press, probably deadlift too. Though that one we weren't testing anything in, but it was still like 6 months. And I'm like, I don't know if that would qualify in my head. But then you get into this issue where it's like, where are you going to find 20? Because you have to have a strong sample size. Where are you going to find 20 to me trained athletes? All right. Okay. And then we can take it a step farther. I'm interested in powerlifting, right? How many female athletes that do you know that are going to pull away from their coach, because normally trained athletes have a coach, and follow a temporary study that they don't know is going to work? So there's a lot that goes into really testing the populations we would be interested in reading research on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's obviously the struggle, right? And so that's why I think, don't quote me because I'm not a researcher, but that's why they have typically done it in untrained males, just because of that reason. It's easier to grab that population and apply a certain stimulus, apply a certain training program to them, and then make a conclusion to say this should probably work. But to your point, it would be very difficult to find the specific population, of those, whether it's female powerlifters, male powerlifters, you name it, whatever is specific. I'm going to just use the term athlete, competitive athlete as a whole, because like collegiate wise, I don't know many coaches that are like just willing to be like, here are my athletes, do whatever you want with them. Like it's always a fight because time is
for
the
sure
biggest thing, right?
Right. Something I've noticed is more common is like using those like collegiate sports teams during like preseason, like those 5-week windows. But too, before we hopped on the record button, we were talking about how you don't really do a back squat with your athletes, right? So would that be trained to me? If I'm looking at studies that are looking at accommodating resistance and they find a huge improvement in the back squat, but they haven't been doing the back squat. So then you've got that. And these are things that I did not consider when I started. I was just like, yeah, bands are definitely going to win. Like, there's no question. That's not what we found.
Yeah. Well, and that's where it's interesting too, right? Because, and to your extent, you probably then have to start to check or determine what is most important, right? And so, is it like, for clarification, I personally don't do back squat with my athletes. There's a lot of coaches that do, but I typically don't. I'm more of a front squat, safety bar, squat type of coach because I just think it's better. There's a lot of, and we can talk about that later, but I know a lot of coaches that still back squat, which is totally fine. Nothing against it. I just prefer I don't. And I work with taller athletes, basketball athletes. So like getting them in a back squat and their levers and all that stuff, it just typically isn't the best for them. It's not that I have anything against it. It's just like my athletes are like 7 feet tall. Like, so, but to the point that I'm making is you probably have to determine what's most important. And so, you're saying, okay, if I have an athlete that's trained and they've been squatting, but it hasn't been the back squat, like I'll take that compared to,
yes,
you know what I'm saying?
100%.
You like they're trained, they're doing this, that they're advanced, they're blah, 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 compared to somebody that's like, I'm completely untrained. I've been training with barbell for 2 months. You're like, crap.
Right. And like somebody like that, like the previous that you mentioned, somebody who's been safety squatting. If you like needed to, you could take your sample that might be more similar to that through a 4-week, maybe even just like a shorter 2 to 3 week familiarization phase, and they've got the gist of how to back squat now, and now you can start that actual training program if that's what you're looking at.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so speaking of programming, training, such a unique topic that we were diving in on here just before we hit record, but the topic of tonnage and volume, because this is what you guys kind of found in your research a little bit too, and then with the athletes you meet with. So if you would tell everybody, what is tonnage, what is volume, and then how do we calculate that, and why is tracking tonnage like an important concept for them?
Yeah, so the difference between volume and tonnage, or I actually just call tonnage volume load, and that's just like combining the two. But volume is multiplying your sets times your repetitions, and so that provides you a number that we consider the volume of that exercise. And then tonnage includes the load. So it's going to be your sets times your reps times your load. And so that's tonnage, or like I said, I call it volume load. And so research has been very clear, I would say, pretty recently that, you know, volume is king. As long as you have a certain volume, it doesn't really matter, like, I don't know, whatever you're looking at. Like, you just have to control for this tonnage in research. And what you were referring to that we found in our study is, like I said, I was looking at how resistance training impacts markers of metabolism after the fact. So post-exercise. And we first were comparing upper versus lower body. And so essentially, like, because tracking your volume load has become such a prevalent part of research, like if you don't do that, you're probably not going to be, your paper's probably not going to be accepted. It's going to be a very big limitation to your study, essentially.
Yeah.
So we were comparing upper versus lower body on substrate metabolism after resistance training. And it was really cool because, well, actually we thought we were going to find that upper body was going to induce a greater like fat metabolism afterwards.
Sure.
And that was mainly because there was a previous study that found upper body single, I think, like unilateral exercise compared to lower unilateral exercise promoted greater fat oxidation.
Okay.
And we actually didn't find that. So I don't know. I've got to go back and read the study. But I don't know if they controlled for volume. But when we matched the volume load between the bench press and what we ended up having to do, I'll explain this in a second, but between bench press and single leg press, the oxidation rates were not significantly different. They were significantly different from baseline, but not between one another. Okay. And so just to add to that, the reason we did bench press and then single leg press instead of bilateral leg press was because the volume differences between lower body strength in females and upper body strength in females is outstanding. And so when we were doing, we originally were going to do bilateral leg press. Well, when I did the math of how many sets and reps these girls were going to have to do in their bench press to match the volume load of their leg press, we actually tried it. It took this girl 6 hours because she needed so much rest by the time she was so tired. Like, even though we were taking like 3 to 5 minute rests, could not do another rep. No way. And this, I kid you not, was 65% of her max.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's
so
insane.
It was that big of a discrepancy between how much strength. So then we went back in and we're like, okay, was it just like a fluke with this girl, or is this going to happen? So we looked at the relative strength between each of our participants, and it was going to happen every time.
It was. Wow.
And I was like, there's no way that I am staying in this gym for 6 hours. Because, I mean, on top of that, you've got to do your baseline metabolic data. We were doing an hour and a half of baseline, or I'm sorry, post exercise metabolic data, it was not good. I was like, we've got to reconfigure this protocol. And so we ended up getting their single leg 1 rep max so that we could, even out the volume load, but without us being there for an ungodly amount of time.
Yeah, because 6 hours just to match the volume load or tonnage is insane on one exercise.
It was wild. Like, I would not have expected that. And I don't think it would have been the same for me. But again, like, I'm literally an outlier no matter what if I'm part of these studies, because I train like this every single day. And I'm like, yeah, 20 sets of 3 with 65%. I could do that easy. Not everybody else.
But 20 sets is a lot of sets, though. Like, like most people.
And that was like the smallest. There were some that were going up to like 30, and I'm like,
that's insane. Because, like, if you think about it, right? Like, some people will be like, I'm going to do 3 to 6 sets, right? And they're like, if I do 6 sets, that's a lot of sets, right?
Right, and they're tired by the end of that.
Exactly, and they're tired by that, and let's be honest.
So then triple it.
Yeah, and they really didn't strain that much, if we're being honest. So.
But, no, and that was another interesting, because I mean, when you do these studies, it's very cool to see the differences in people. So you've got, so the people of my participants who have been like barbell training, they were doing the barbell bench press very consistently. They had a lot of force to give, but they gave out faster whenever you started like adding volume to it.
Sure.
So it was interesting to see, with those more like fast twitch muscle fibers, those were recruited very well because, for the moment that they needed to hit that 1 rep max. But then whenever you had them do 65% over and over again, they were like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
As opposed to my participants who were more aerobically trained, yes. They did not have a very high 1 rep max, but they could have probably done their 65% in way less sets because they had just the endurance aspect there.
So actually, as you were just explaining that before you touched on the aerobic athletes, that's where my head went, because there's a huge push right now for zone 2 aerobic work consistently, 30, 45 minutes, 45, 60 minutes, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week. And because what we're seeing is how important the aerobic system truly is, right? And if we want repeated bouts of high intensity efforts, whether that's in a set, whether that's in a sprint, whether that's in a jump, whether that's whatever the case may be, a squat, like, your aerobic system is going to, be the system that's going to allow the ATP replenishment for you to continue to have the muscular endurance to push at high intensities. And I read a tweet, and I can't remember who tweeted this, and I said this on one of the other podcasts, but it like sticks with me. And it was intensity without capacity is just fatigue. And that's a good one. I can't remember. So whoever said it, I feel bad because I'm not giving them credit. But it was somebody else. It's not me. I'm not that smart. But I read it and I was like, that makes so much sense. Like it just hit me, and I'm like, yep, there it is. So it's like we can be intense, and we see this, right? Like I'm gonna use Can I use powerlifts as an example?
Of course, that's a great example.
Yeah. They're very intense. Like, they lift a lot of weight. They're strong. But you ask a power lifter to do something repeatedly, it's not happening, right? They need that 7 minutes of rest or, whatever else, just to, because it's like they're just, so strong, which is fantastic. And it's not the issue of being strong. It's just like they don't train the aerobic system, right?
Right.
And it's actually fascinating, because now you start to see the differentiation between that. And then you take an endurance athlete and you ask them to do, strength work. And like, obviously they can't push the intensity component of it, right? That makes sense. But what they can do is the repeated bouts of effort on whatever it is.
It doesn't take them long to recover.
Exactly. And it's just like, so should we focus more, not focus, but like, should capacity be as big of a deal for
I completely agree. And I feel like that's a hill I've be willing to die on, is that, powerlifters, yes, That 1 rep max strength, that's what's going to help you win your competition. However, if you do not have the capacity to practice high intensities over and over and over again, then you are doing yourself a disservice. You're going to hit that wall a lot faster, and your 1 rep max probably isn't going to improve as much as it could. Yep. And so having that volume capacity and increasing your volume threshold is going to be huge when you do get into that repetition phase for your meet or your competition, and you are working towards that maximal 1 rep max strength. Well, if you can do more at higher intensities, then you are pushing that needle forward to where you can achieve more maximal strength. So I think that, unfortunately, previous, fitness culture has talked so much about cardio killing your gains that now we've got a bunch of really sad, strong people.
Yes.
But not as strong as you could be.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the thing. Okay. So to that point, because I agree with you 100%. I've really started implementing a lot more zone 2 work. And I'll tell you what, I'm just going to use pull-ups, for example. I'm 220 pounds, right? And, doing pull-ups is not a easy thing, right? Like you're 222 or 220 pounds, but when I do more zone 2 work, whether that's just going for a 45-minute walk consistently, whether that's incline on a treadmill, elliptical, assault bike, just for long, slow duration of time, my pull-ups increase so much. And the reason why I use pull-ups is because it's a bodyweight exercise, right? I believe every male should be able to do 10 pull-ups easily. And I mean that, right? But when I don't do my cardio work, right, or zone 2 aerobic work, for those of us that are educated, then my pull-ups drop significantly. And there's such a correlation to it. It's not even funny. So I'm like, well, okay. Heck, so cool. I got to continue doing that then. You know what I'm saying? Because it's once I stop doing that, my pull-ups go down. And pull-ups are just regular body weight strength. So are you stronger? Are you not? It's a very simple question, right? And it's if you can't do 5 pull-ups, if you can't do 10 pull-ups, and not just one set, but multiple sets. If you can't do that, we have an issue. We have a baseline issue. And that's just a, N equals 1 of me for, zone 2 aerobic work. But I'm well, if I see that's got to be prevalent with other people.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, I can see a difference in just my athletes' recovery times between their sets. It's if my athlete is saying that they're needing, 8 to 10 minutes for, sub-maximal work, I'm okay, we need to work on that. Because, I mean, I could take 2 minutes. I'm all right, let's go. That's it. Yeah. But that's something I work on. And yeah, you can get into the mechanisms of it. But all in all, these energy systems that we have basically put in a box, we're power output, this energy system, moderate intensity exercise, this energy system, aerobic exercise, this energy system. No, they are not in a box. They are intercorrelated and they help one another. They are 100% involved in one another. And so when we start just associating with, if I want to be a good powerlifter, all I need to do is work this energy system. That's not the case. Yeah. The components that you're working in this energy system get replenished with this energy system. And so they are connected. And so you can't just forget one or avoid one. And then I also think that, through strength and conditioning over the years, we got so attached to this word specific. Everything has to be specific. And so then it's okay, well, if I'm a basketball player, why do I need to go for a run? That's not going to be helpful to my sport. I'm yeah, maybe not those movements that you're doing on the court. But again, you're not always training just the movement. We should be training these energy systems because they are what's just contributing the energy to the movement. Right. So yes, do both. There's nothing wrong with being specific. I think you should be specific. I'm not going to take my back squat, bench press, deadlift away from my power lifter. Sure. But I also am going to make them work hard enough to stimulate adaptations to these other components.
Right.
And then it gets outside of our sport. Like performance, yes, all for it. But we're all getting older, and there are other things that we should worry about than just our sport.
Yes. Yeah, so to that point, you make a really good point there. And I'm going to say I agree with you, and then I'm going to say there's a time and a place, right? So,
Yeah.
With that example, for basketball specifically, like off-season wise, if you want to go for a 5-mile run, great. Awesome, right?
Agreed.
Obviously, in season, no, because like we're not controlling for a lot of other things and like load and time on feet and all this other stuff, right?
Yes.
Off season,
I completely agree.
Yeah. Like off season, heck yeah, huge proponent.
Even like I still would program that. Like I mean, if we're talking about a walk, maybe a 1 mile run, I don't care when you do it. When we start getting into the like higher ends of working, I'm like, okay, let me program that in for you so that it doesn't impair our training program. Right. But I agree, and we're the same way on this powerlifting side. I let my athletes know because I have a lot of athletes who enjoy other hobbies, which I'm all for, and I support and I encourage them to do that. Mm-hmm. But if they're in meet prep, I'm like, all right, 6 weeks out, more of this ice skiing and all that crap. Yeah. Like, let's sit that aside for a moment, focus on what we're trying to accomplish here, and as soon as you get through this competition, you can go back to all your skiing and climbing and mountain hiking for 50 miles.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I think that's the key. So for anybody listening and watching, like it's context specific, and I'm going to say it's season specific, right?
Yes.
If you're in a meet prep, like you should be focused on the meet. If you're in preseason and in season with basketball or with whatever sport, like you should be focused on that sport. Now off season, like, yep. Hey, if you want to go do
a little more flexibility.
Sure. Yeah. If you want to go do something recreationally because you enjoy it, like go do that. Because I want you to enjoy life and I want you to get away and recharge and do all the things. Like if you just enjoy going for a casual 3-mile stroll, like cool, go do that. Like I'm never going to be upset by that. And that's, I think a lot of people are like, well, I can't have my athlete do a 2-mile run after our training session. It's just like, okay, like whatever. Yep. They're going to do it anyways, whether they tell you or not, so you might as well just encourage it.
That is so true. That's true with me. I've done so much of that.
I mean, like, that's the thing is, like, if we just try to, like, squeeze them, I'm like, you can't do that. You can only do what I tell you to do. Like, they're going to go do it, and they're just not going to tell us about it. And then we're going to get frustrated, and then we're going to be like, why are you sore? And, like, I went on a, whatever mile run or whatever, and just like, oh, and it's just like, you're just hurting yourself. Like, just be like, hey, if you want to do this, do that. That's great. But like just talking about that. One of my athletes, one of my athletes, women's rugby player, we were in season in 15. So that's the fall season. And then 7s is the spring season. And she would get up and run prior to our training session. And then one of them would go and do CrossFit and like in season. And I was just like, I don't want I don't want you doing that in season. If you want to do that out of season, fine. But like you running before we're going to go train probably isn't beneficial. I mean, it probably is, but we're going to train and then you have practice and then you have games and like, sure, maybe they didn't like actually play and that's okay. But it's just like, can you just not do this in season? Like it would be
there's a lot more to consider, but I think too, you're dealing with kids who have no idea. They have no idea how this affects them. And so I think, having a very kindly put, I don't know really what word I'm looking for, but educating them in a way that doesn't like put them down, but just like, educates them and communicates with them like the importance of your training and of fueling for your training. And then whenever you're adding additional exercise on top of that, what that might cause. Yeah. And, just getting the priority straight, basically.
Right. Yeah, because it like several times where I'm going to use the CrossFit one as an example. They'd go doing CrossFit on Sunday because they had the most amount of time. So, like, I want to go get a good workout in. And that's, like, cool. Like, I like that. But, unfortunately, and this isn't slandering CrossFit. It's just, they have whatever they're going to do for the day, and they're all competitive, which I love. But then they would come back Monday morning and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm super sore and tired and fatigued. And I'm like, well, what did you do? And they're like, oh, we did this, this, and that. And it's like all, lower body heavy volume too. And I'm like, well, we're front squatting today. Like, great. Like, we have no control over. And so it was just having those conversations, and they're like, well, I'm still going to try really hard. I'm like, yeah, but that's like might actually like make things worse than giving you time to recover. And oh, by the way, you also got 4 hours of sleep last night, so like this isn't good. So anyways, enough on that soapbox, but it's frustrating. So okay, another component that I think you do extremely well, and that you can help people on, is the online business space component. Alyssa also trains specifically powerlifters online, but she has an online business where they do very well for themselves. And how did that come about? How do you recommend for other people to kind of start to get clients, athletes to, start making money as well, and not being afraid to make money? And I think that's a huge thing that people are afraid to do.
Oh, that's so true. And, I can only speak from my own experience. Yeah. And I've done everything wrong, so hopefully my story can help everybody else not make the same mistakes. But so my business is called Lady Beef Coaching, and one word. Everybody likes to split it up, but it's one word. Honestly, just because I think whenever you put it in 2 words, it just sounds weird and wrong and so many levels. So this name came from when I was in undergrad. So I got my bachelor's degree in exercise science. That's all I have in terms of degrees: master in exercise science, PhD in exercise science. And so I was very new to exercise in general. I kind of just like stumbled upon this field and ended up obsessed with it before I even was like involved in resistance training. So I was trying to, but I'm a very visual learner, and I also am very, I like to write to retain information. So I was in my first classes for exercise science and started like going to the gym, like put to work what I was learning in the classroom. And I was telling a friend that so you've heard the term meatheads. Well, Lady Beef is like, it stems from that word. So I had heard that word before, but I mind you, I'm like 20, maybe 19. I don't even know. Probably 18 or 19, actually. And I was telling a friend that all of the beef heads in the gym, which I meant to say meatheads, I just didn't know what I was talking about, were annoying because they hog all the equipment, they leave the dumbbells everywhere, and I'm referring to all the men in the gym. and I was like, but all the lady beefs are awesome. I want to be a lady beef one day. And that's where it came from. And so I started a blog so that I could start just writing what I was learning, putting it on my own words, and I called my blog Lady Beef. And so that's how it started, and that was 2013. Wow. And then in 2015 is really when social media started to take off. Mm-hmm. And I was actually involved in bodybuilding first. And so I was competing in my first bodybuilding competitions, and somebody approached me about coaching them. However, they lived in Georgia and I was in Alabama. So that was my first remote client. Sure. And I'm like, how does this business thing work? I hadn't registered nothing. I just started calling my business Lady Beef because that was my blog. So that's really where it kind of kicked off. It wasn't until 2017 that I decided to actually pursue it as a business and get all of those things worked out. And I was not good at it, and I'm still not good at it. So I outsource. I would highly recommend, if, something doesn't come naturally to you, to outsource. So I've worked with a handful of accountants trying to figure out, who's going to work best with me. And I ended up finding my most recent one last year, who she mainly works with people who have businesses online, so remote businesses. She works with fitness businesses. I'm like, okay, so you get what I'm doing and what I need to do to do everything correctly. I don't. So I'm like, I need you to tell me what to do. So I would say that was a big push in the right direction for my business. But just like in terms of how to get clients, honestly, it just all started with a guinea pig. So I have one client who was one of my first remote clients, but I had also worked with her in person for a little while, had known her for a good bit. When I decided I wanted to pursue powerlifting, she was like, if you want to test out how to program on me, like I'm all for it. She ended up doing a powerlifting competition. And so the thing that I've always recommended for new or aspiring coaches is not being afraid of people knowing that you're new to it. I think that we have this, imposter syndrome, I guess, where it's like, if people think that I don't know what I'm doing, that I don't know what I'm doing, that they're not going to work with me. And honestly, this just hasn't been the case. And I don't think that it's going to be the case for most people. Otherwise, that's okay. Like, find the people that don't mind you testing things out on them. And so I had this guinea pig client that I did, conjugate with and daily undulated periodization with and linear periodization. I'm like, I'm reading all these books. Let's try all these different models. Yes. And I mean, that kind of worked in my favor in the long run because now I have all of these different tools to pull from. I had somebody to work with it on, and then I started building that clientele. I had in-person clients at the time. I was working as a personal trainer. I'd been a personal trainer for like a decade nearly. And, the ones that were interested in learning how to barbell, back squat, bench press, and deadlift and get stupid strong, they were like, yes, let's do it. So, I mean, obviously I didn't get to do that with all of my clients. Not everybody wants to do that sort of thing. But the ones that were interested, I mean, I'd already built that, relationship with them, and they were fine with me trying different things out on them. Like, hey, we're gonna try a powerlifting program for the next several weeks. So yeah, I think just being honest with people and having a guinea pig is a great place to start. Another thing that I did when I wanted to become more known as a powerlifting coach was start a sponsorship program. So we offer an athlete sponsorship every year. And that really just started with me being like, hey, I have a bunch of general population clients online, but I really want to start focusing my niche on powerlifters. And so over time, I've gotten to do just that. I started the sponsorship program. I then just kind of narrowed my niche and being like, I'm not going to get rid of any of my current clients that are not recreational or competitive powerlifters, but I'm not going to take on any more. I am going to narrow that niche and only accept clients who are interested in, again, recreational is totally fine, competitive, whatever. Just as long as they're interested in holding a barbell in their hands, I don't care. Sure. And so it really started, to transition for me from there. And then as we started to get more clients and my plate started to get full, I started my master's in 2019, and I really went back to school mainly because I wanted to be better at programming. Sure. I have imposter syndrome like anybody else. And I found a master's program that was in applied exercise science, and we literally were like programming for different athletes every week and getting feedback from, these people that have been doing it a long time. So that was super helpful. Yeah, and so that helped, but of course that was added work on my plate. So during my master's, I brought on my first contract employee, my first assistant coach. Yes. And so she started taking on those general population clients, mainly because I was still getting inquiries for them. Yeah, so and it's like I don't want to turn people away. Yeah, so I would get inquiries for general population, but we brought her on so that she could train those people. They're still, team Lady Beef. I just didn't coach those. Yeah. And then she was a recreational powerlifter. So she would take on also like beginners that were interested in getting familiar with barbell training. And so she would kind of just introduce them into that world. And then when I started my PhD is when I brought on my next coach, who is he trains anybody, but he is a powerlifter and more specifically a powerlifting coach. Sure. So that helped me a lot because I did not want to turn down powerlifters that wanted to be under us. Right. But I was starting a PhD. I had a 6-month-old at the time. I was like, I cannot do this. but I don't want my business to suffer. I've worked really hard on this since 2013, essentially. And so brought him on, and he started taking on any additional powerlifters that came our way. And, so I just increase my clientele when I can. I always focus on the people that are under me now.
Sure.
Like the athletes that I'm working with now are my top priority. And I want to make sure that they're succeeding in their goals because their goals are my goals.
Yep.
And as I can add people to that, then I will. But if I'm, in the middle of a semester, I'm not adding onboarding any more athletes. I'll give them to our other coaches.
Yep.
If I'm just, slammed at the moment with meets and competitors and stuff, I'll be like, all right, let's push your onboarding to this time, that sort of thing. So I just take everything with where I'm at. I wouldn't say that we necessarily grow at like this exponential rate. I just want to make sure that the people that are under us are taken care of. They're our first priority, and we can grow as that opportunity presents itself. But we're not in a hurry to be like the number one powerlifting program out there, like, or the most people, I would say, under us.
Sure.
Like, I don't care if we have a team of 100. I want our team of whatever to be the best.
Yeah.
So that's where I would say our priorities might differ sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's extremely fascinating because, like, one, that's a lot to do all at one time if people don't really understand that. So you are in a master's, you brought on an assistant coach. So not only are you doing your master's, learning how to program, but you're teaching that coach how to work for you, with you, what customer service looks like for your athletes, what programming standardization looks like what the process and systems look like. Like, that is not an easy task to do successfully. And then you started a PhD and you had a 6-month-old. Like, first of all, that's crazy because taking care of a baby, let alone having a baby, going through the pregnancy process, and then a 6-month-old, start a PhD, and then you're like, hey, you know what, I'm gonna bring on another coach. Like, there's a lot going on there for those of you that don't understand, let alone how much
going on. But at the same time, I think it would have been worse if they didn't.
Yeah, because like and I've never done a PhD, but I don't think people realize how much time a PhD actually takes, and the thought process and the amount of detail and just like the time. I mean, you talked earlier about how you spent 6 hours in a lab, with a girl doing just bench press to hit her tonnage for this one specific, and then you're like, we can't do that anymore. Like, 6 hours, that's a half a day, right? Like, just be like, okay, girl, like, I know you're done resting, like, let's go. But like, it's just like, so that's a lot for people that have never done that before. Like, that is a lot, which is awesome.
And I mean, you're like, every day is your first day doing that, right? Like, I had never, first of all, I never saw myself going back to school. That was never something I considered until I was in my master's and realized how much I wanted to not be done. Like, I loved learning. I really wanted to be involved in research. I really wanted to become an educator at like that higher level. One thing that always attracted me to athletes is that athletes love to learn. They're just not just there to socialize. Like, they're there to perform and they're there to learn. They're very inquisitive, and I love being asked questions. And so I just kind of figured out through my master's, I want to continue to coach and have that applied side, but I also want to teach the little me that was in, her bachelor's. I had no idea what she wanted to do, but loved this material. And so I want to be the teacher that I always wanted and needed. And so that's kind of where that stemmed from and why it progressed into my PhD. But yeah, like, whenever you, especially like, the having a kid right before you start your PhD, definitely would not recommend. I had a friend who was also getting her PhD tell me that she wanted to have a baby during her PhD. And I was like, I believe in you, but 1010 would not recommend. Like, I'm just saying.
What?
It is not like they're going to sleep while you want to work or sleep at all. So, it's a lot.
Congratulations, by the way. I mean, that's awesome. Like that's
Thanks. He just turned 2 this week.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
2, they grow up so fast, don't they?
I know. I'm like, you were 6 months when we started this, and you're 2. That doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. My brother has 2 kids that are 2 and 1, and they turned.
Oh my God! Literally, the idea of having 2 under 2 is pretty much my worst nightmare. Yeah. I don't know how those people do it.
Yeah, and then, so like their birthdays will be here in the summertime, and they'll be like 3 and 2. So they're.
Oh my God!
You know, with 2 years old, they're running around and they're pointing.
Right, I don't know how they handle it.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you're like trying to read research. And
yeah, he will not. He is triggered by books that are not his books and a computer and laptop. Like, you are not allowed to do schoolwork or any kind of work when he's around. It's all about him.
That's awesome. I think that's really cool though. So, okay. You said people from an online perspective, like you were getting inquiries. So I think a lot of coaches struggle with this. And I'm going to call it lead generation or whatever you want to call it. Same thing. Did you actively reach out to people to be like, hey, by the way, I'm a powerlifting coach. If you would like to work with me, great. Or were like people sending you DMs like, hey, could you coach me? Because I think people really struggle with this. They're like, I don't want to go the cold DM route. I don't want to go the route of like annoying people and letting them know that like, I'm a coach and, whatever the case may be. And then some people like throw it out there. If it sticks, it sticks. If not, it's not. Like, how would you kind of recommend people getting the lead gen or inquiries or, what that looks like?
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to, again, just personal experience. Like, I have never done a business course or anything like that. The thing that has grown our business the most is relationships and word of mouth. Building those relationships with my athletes. They tell people that they love working with me. They tell their friends, they tell other powerlifters what they're doing, and that sends people our way. And then I also post a lot of educational content on Instagram that resonate with people. I try and go more of the like how exercise physiology pertains to powerlifting. I feel like that's become more of my niche because, one, I don't want to regurgitate information that's like constantly out there, and so that does end up like kind of reducing the amount of content I put out. But I try really hard to think of things that haven't really been discussed a whole lot. And so I think that has also attracted the type of people that I like to work with. Like I said, I like to work with people that like to learn. And so people who are going to ask questions and want to know more about like, okay, why do you program this? Or like, what's this helping me with? What do I do for this? And that's just my type of person. And so making sure that I am putting out information that would attract that type of client for me. And then, being nice to people. This is going to sound so cliche, but like, I am a referee. I volunteer at a lot of meets and I compete at a lot of meets. I go and handle my athletes at a lot of meets. And when I am there, I'm helping other people. I'm helping, the athletes that need just a kind face in an environment that they've never been in. I'm helping load the bar for these other athletes, and just being a good person, honestly, has gotten me a lot of clients. Like, I've gone to meets where I've competed and gotten clients out of that, because of just how I treat them. I'm not going to act like I'm better than you or too cool for school. Like, this is a community. And so honestly, I think, just to give a short and to the point answer for that question, like, get out there and be a good person, and you will attract those type of people. And, I think it is important to let people know that you are a coach. So, like, if you are on social media, like, putting that in there, like, Powerlifting Coach. If you have a website, put that on there, put out educational content. Instagram's super cool right now, and you can put these little pinned posts at the top of your profile that I think are hella cool. And, like, put your coaching philosophy there. So I have ones that go into detail about who I am, what I offer, and what my coaching philosophy is, and what I help my athletes do. And so that puts it like right there in front of their face. If they are looking for a coach, they're like, oh snap, look at that. It's right there. Or, putting it on a website. You don't even need a website. Just put it on your bio or something.
Yeah.
But I do think it needs to be listed somewhere where people that are probably, following you are going to find it.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. But yeah, I think it really, the majority of clients that I've had a very long time came from word of mouth from other clients. I mean, I'll have athletes, one recently who went to a strength and conditioning like seminar or clinic on like the opposite end of the map from me. I'm in Alabama. I think this was in like Washington. My client went to that and I got an athlete out of it. Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's just like it travels. And it ends up, being the type, because it ends up being the type of athlete that I want. Somebody who also coaches, who is very interested in exercise science, has her bachelor's in it. And that's the majority of my clients. Like they are all very much so, I guess they are very like-minded to me. And I guess I like to coach myself. Because that is my ideal client.
No, and I love that. And I think what you said there is extremely important because most people don't even know who their ideal client is. Right?
Yes, and I agree that is very hard to figure out. And I would say that mine has changed over time, and like how we've probably talked about pre-recording, our interests change and they're redirected over time. And I think that can honestly be the case for pretty much anything you look at. And that's been the case for me as a coach too. Like my interest in who I work with has changed over time. But I've kind of figured out that it almost changes with how I change. So as my interests change and how I change, that's what interests me almost. So I guess I just follow me.
Exactly. And to that point though, it's the classic saying like the riches are in the niches, and essentially like, hey, have a client avatar. This is who I want to work with, right? And they check those boxes and they work with you. And if not, hey, I'm sorry, unfortunately, I'm not accepting or whatever. And actually, I have a coach that I think would work great for you. Boom, awesome, right?
I always try and recommend coaches if it's something that's like outside our wheelhouse.
Yeah, exactly.
So having and that works for your favor too. If you start recommending clients to other coaches and they get word of that, or you tell them that, they're going to do the same for you too.
Big time stuff. So, if you are trying to work with people online, niche down and say, I'm going to do this one area and I'm going to be the best in this one area, right? Like I spoke with another girl the other day and she does sprint training for soccer athletes. And like that is essentially like who she wants to work with. Like that's like youth to like high school soccer athletes is like who she wants to train. And like she's written a book on it. She's specifically.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, she's awesome. Her name's Erica Sutter. If you guys don't know who she is, she's awesome. She's super intelligent. She was just on the other day, and we're gonna bring her on. Like, she's super intelligent, but like that's her niche, and she's a really good. So if you're a youth soccer player and you need to get faster, go to Erica because she's awesome, and she'll definitely help you. And she's really, really intelligent, and buy her book too. But so that's her niche, right? And then another friend of mine is like baseball, like that's his niche, like baseball specific pitchers, like that's it, and so I think that's extremely important because like when you do that, you're speaking to a specific person, right? And like what I mean by that is like when I say I work with high school and college basketball athletes, that tells you that's who I work with. If you don't fit that, hey, I'm probably not the guy for you. Could I help you? Absolutely. But I work with this client. For you, it's power lifters, right? Like for Erica, it's so you need to niche down because it's extremely important because then your messaging, your branding, your topics of conversation all point to that athlete. So when they land on your page, whether it's website, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Twitter, whatever, they go, boom, this is who I'm working with. Because it's no question. You're like, they answer every question about whatever specific topic of mine because that's who they are. You know what I'm saying? So I think too many people try to go too broad, too general, especially in the beginning. Like, I'll work with anybody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that is something, I think that newer coaches, aspiring coaches, they fall in this belief that if they're too narrow, then they won't get any clients. Like they need to open their doors to everybody. Otherwise, nobody will, work with them.
Yep.
And I think that like those of us who've been in this for a while have seen that it's the exact opposite, and that if you don't work with specific people, then you probably will never get the people you want. Now I do think there is a little bit of a caveat to that. I think, if you've never worked with anyone before, maybe start with general population, more, not specific to maybe an age group or, definitely not a sport.
Yes.
But, I think that there is a caveat there. So
agreed.
If you are starting out and you don't know the first thing about walking somebody through how to squat, pitch, sprint, I don't know, what have you, then maybe we start from more of the beginning. Because you're learning too, and that's okay. We've all been there also. I started personal training in 2012. So by the time I started powerlifting coaching in 2016, it had been a handful of years of me teaching people and in person too. I think that was a big benefit also. I think it's way harder to communicate and get especially technique considerations across remotely. And so having that background and working with people one-on-one in person, I think I got a whole lot better at communicating what I wanted to see from my athletes. And I've also over time figured out the best ways to get that across to them, whether it be it through a comment or through a video or whatever. So I think you just learn over time, but
yeah, absolutely.
I think it is important to have a niche at least at some point.
Yeah, so I agree with your caveat 100%. If you've never worked with anybody, then you need to start working with people, right?
Yeah, exactly. People.
Yes, and then you can become more specific or specialized, if you will. That says, okay, hey, I want to work with this population, right? So you got to work with people to get to the population. But I also heard something. I don't know do you know who Ed Milet is?
Say that again.
Do you know who Ed Milet is?
I don't think I do.
He's a super successful businessman, entrepreneur, speaker.
Probably not.
He's amazing. But he said something and it resonated. He said, "You are most inclined and able to help the person that you once were." And what I mean by that is he expands on that. But essentially, I'm a previous college athlete. Who do I love to work with? College athletes, right?
Right.
You're a power lifter. Who do you love to work with? Power lifters, right? So it's and the reason why he says this is because you have the experience, the knowledge, all that stuff. You can relate to them, but then you can also teach them how to navigate that area better, and so they can be more successful, essentially, right? And maybe you did things in your career that you probably shouldn't have, or you didn't capitalize on opportunities when you shouldn't have, right? And so when he said that, I was that makes so much sense, right? Or if a lot of times this is what happens with coaches is they played a sport, they got injured, that took them away from the sport, right? So now they want to give back because they're I wasn't able to fulfill my potential because of my injury, and I want you to do that. So I'm going to help you so you can hopefully never get injured so you can fulfill your potential. I see that a lot with coaches, which I think is awesome. And I think some of those coaches make the best coaches because they truly care. So it's
right.
You're still struggling with who do I work with? Who were you or what did you used to do? And are you still super passionate about that? Because you could really help people right away in that aspect. And it could be
I love that. That's such a good step.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's not for me. I heard that from him and I was gosh, he's so smart, That's why he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So
wow.
But to wrap this up, because I want to be respectful of your time, any closing thoughts? And if not, where can people find you at?
Yeah, so I'm not very good at thinking of anything on the spot. But I really thank you for this conversation. It has been so much fun. I hope that all of your listeners get a little something, maybe a nugget or two out of this conversation. But if any of you guys are interested in talking to me, please feel free to reach out on either my Instagram, which is just my name at Alyssa Parten, or you can email me, Alyssa at ladybeefinc.com. You can find us on our website if you want to work with us or check out, the different things that we offer on ladybeefinc.com. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome. So if you guys are interested, go reach out to her. If you want to learn something about the research that she's doing, reach out to her, because I think she's just beginning her research journey. I think she's going to expand and explode, and it's going to be insane. You're going to see her name everywhere. So I think that's awesome. So thank you for your time. I've learned something, and would absolutely continue to love to learn more from you throughout over time and everything as well, because I think what you're diving into, especially with female athletes and trained athletes and everything of that nature, is so fascinating, and it's going to help a lot of people, honestly. So thank you for your time.
That's the goal.
Yeah. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it, guys. If you got one thing from this episode, if you got educated, entertained, or encouraged, do us a huge favor, hit a like, hit a comment, hit a subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment below, let her know what a great job she did. And if you have questions, drop a question below, because I'm sure she'd be willing to answer it when you guys do. So Alyssa, thank you for your time, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.
Thank you.